I learned what my hospital sounds like when it's asleep the first month I switched to nights. Night float means cross-covering 19 strangers who all belong to daytime physicians who text you at 5 p.m. with T-checks in advance and go home to families who believe in sleep. It means answering nurse pages that pivot between mundane and catastrophic patient pulled out for to BP 60/40ths after bathroom, and it means memorizing a geography of half-lit hallways so thoroughly the building's bones feel like yours. The freight elevators make a different noise than the visitors' lifts, a throatier cough, a labored clink that belongs to pallets of saline and the occasional morgue run. By week 2, I could tell which elevator someone was using by the way the floor hummed. I'm a hospitalist. Nights, we're the glue. Critical care down one hall, ED up the other, telemetry talking with the intubated, and in between, a corridor of status changes the day teams will only see in the morning after the lobby Starbucks flips its lights on. If there's one area we all agree not to get poetic about, it's transfers. Transfers are paperwork and phone calls and liability. Transfers are EMTALA, ADT, IP/OBS conversions, and forms with signature lines that end careers when they're empty. And my patients, the ones without insurance, started disappearing. Not thin air. Not supernatural, not first. Stabilized on 4 fluids and antibiotics, sat upright and joking at midnight vitals, and then gone at 5 a.m. when I rounded with a resident whose eyes were still punishing her for choosing medicine. The chart would show discharge disposition, 02, transfer to short-term general hospital. The ADT feed would log an A02 event, then an A03, then an A08 update with the facility name I'd never heard. The nurse would swear up and down no transport team ever came to the unit. The unit clerk would shrug, tap the transfer out in the bedboard system, and the bed would immediately fill with a fresh ED admit as if the hospital had been waiting for the patient to evaporate. The first time, I told myself it was a clerical error in a slog of night. The second time, I told myself someone had arranged something without looping me in, and I was being precious about process. By the third, I started making a list in my pocket notebook because paper can't gaslight you. Case 1, 58M, pancreatitis. Alcohol history, uninsured, admitted from ED for fluids and pain control, lactate improved, vitals stable at 028, interfacility transfer at 307 to St. Aloysius Annex West, acceptance note scanned, chart read-only by 312. Called St. Aloysius, switchboard rang into a recycling bin. Googled later, closed in 2016. Case 2, 47F DKA, no primary care. Anine gap closed after insulin drip. Step down to sub-Q sliding scale at 2310, interfacility transfer at 419 to County Partner East. Called our case management, no record. Called the county, they don't have an East. Case 3, 63M pneumonia, O2 needs down to 2 liters, ambulating to chair at midnight. FT at 258, acceptance note scanned with a witness signature by a nurse who moved to Florida before the pandemic. Chart locked by 3 o'clock. Day team shrugged. Maybe he changed his mind. Families do that. People don't change their mind about going to another hospital at 3 a.m. without signing something in a room with a person whose eyebrows have mastered calm. I keep my census on a clipboard because the EHR makes me hate my hands. Night 3 of the second week, my cross cover was 16 medicine patients and a handful of surgical strays. In my pocket notebook, the transfer names had grown a common theme in the discrete fields that aren't supposed to talk to each other. Same acceptance letter template, same blocky font, same interfacility transfer consent with exactly the same typos. A missing comma after I recall that. Different destination names, but the acceptance NPI number at the bottom was identical. I reached for the phone to call case management again, and then remembered it was 2:31. Our CM team consists of one person triaging ED crashes and holding her bladder hostage until 5. Dr. Anand, the 7W charge nurse, Ben said, peering around my door like his head was applying for a visa. Transport is on their way to pick up Mr. Tiralba. They say they have orders for an IFT. Do you have orders for an IFT? I swiveled the screen and showed him the blank transfers in my orders tab. No, I didn't know he needed one. Ben frowned in the way veteran nurses frown when they're deciding whether to make you their project or their problem. Do you want to call the accepting hospital? I'd like to know which one it is. He glanced at the EHR, squinted at a scanned PDF whose edges were too crisp to have been photocopied tonight. St. Aloysius Annex West, he read out loud. I thought that place closed. It did, I said. It felt performative to say it. I dialed security instead of calling transport. This is Dr. Anand on nights. Can you tell me if transport is on their way to 7W for a Mr. Tiralba? Stand by, the guard said, and the clickety keyboard in the background made me nostalgic for typewriters. We've got a transport ticket created at 2:34, destination loading dock B, route freight elevator 4. Who created it? Looks like automated dispatch. That's just the bedboard when it gets a dispo. Can you pull the camera for freight 4? Long pause. It's on a different VMS. Hold. Another voice came on, older, the overnight supervisor whose whole demeanor is a shrug license. Dr. Anand? We can't pull cam on freight 4 from here. Plant Ops has the feed, it's on their local. We can pull the dock and the corridor and the elevator lobby. That's fine, I said. Pull it. Back on 7W, I stood at the nurse's station while the unit clerk printed a transfer packet that had not existed 20 minutes ago. The acceptance note had my name typed under physician coordinating, my NPI correct, my hand nowhere on it. The signature line for patient informed of risks / benefits of transfer had the precise ballpoint hesitation of a man who formed his letters the same way he took his meds, only when a woman whose name he couldn't pronounce told him he had to. 2 witness lines were filled, one by Ben, his eyebrows went up before I could speak, one by case manager, A. Morel RN. How did my name end up on this? Ben asked the room like the ceiling would testify. A. Morel? I said, to no one in particular. She retired 3 years ago. You want me to cancel the transport? Ben said, almost gently. I want to know what happens if we do, I said. My EMR extracurriculars consist of writing dot phrases and not getting sued. Canceling an order I didn't place for a transfer that didn't legally exist felt like asking the building to pick a side. The unit clerk cleared her throat cautiously. Transport's here. I expected gowned paramedics or the hospital's own transporters, 2 kids with tattoos, moving stretchers, and awkward jokes. Instead, 2 people in plain charcoal scrubs with no hospital logo pushed a gurney up to the nurse's station like they'd already been told they would not be challenged. One wore a badge that looked like ours until you tried to read it, and then it went blurry. The other wore no badge at all. I'm Dr. Anand, I said. We didn't order this transfer. Doctor, the interfacility has been accepted, the badgeless one said in a tone for door-to-door missionaries. He held up a clipboard whose forms looked exactly like the ones in our printer tray. If you have concerns, you can follow up with bed management in the morning. The morning, Ben repeated flatly, like this was a new brand of insult. Which facility is accepting, I asked, though I knew the answer. St. Aloysius Annex West, he said, putting a gentle hand on the gurney's rail like he was petting a dog. Let's not delay Mr. Tiralba's care. St. Aloysius is closed, I said. It reopened, he said, with a smile that didn't reach anything. You're going to need to tell me where my patient is going before he leaves the floor, Ben said, the nurse voice that ends debates without violence. Doctor, the man said to me again, Because people like him love hierarchies when they can wield them and loathe them when they can't. If you don't sign, the hospital can still accept the transfer per family wishes. The consent's already scanned. I thought of the unit cameras, the ADT system that had created a transport ticket when the interfacility was input, the phrase per family wishes turning up in my EHR notes like a stamp I didn't buy. We're not signing, I said, not for any policy reason, but because the man's certainty made me want to ruin his night. He smiled brightly. That's okay, he said, with a cheerfulness that meant this sentence was practice. It's already accepted. The gurney wheels squeaked away and then turned toward the service corridor, not the visitor's elevator lobby. Freight elevator 4 sits around the corner from the med room, behind a beige door that looks like a closet and a keypad that looks like it broke in 1999 and was repaired with hope. The doors are double and tall, pocked from decades of rolling racks and pallets. The indicator above the frame displays floors with single red LEDs that waver when the car moves. The transporters badge the keypad, which beeped the beep of money, and the doors open to a car that smelled faintly of salt water and bleach. They pushed the gurney and without looking behind them to see if we were following. Ben took 2 steps and then stopped like someone had pulled a tiny, invisible leash attached to his sternum. I walked closer, looked up at the panel, and waited for them to press a button that said where they thought they were going. No button I recognized was lit. Basement, sub-basement, 1, 2, 3, Mez, or. Freight 4 has number 4. It has LL for lower level where the dock is and B and SB for the usual subterranean sins, boilers, chilled water plant, oxygen tanks. The transporter reached up in a comfortable practiced way and turned a key in a switch that said service. A new light, green, blinked above the panel where our old fireman's mode sits. The floor indicator turned to, and then to something I'd never seen, S4. The doors shut with a seriousness I didn't like. Ben stared at me. What's S4? Service 4. I said and heard myself making something up. Sub 4? There's only SB and B on the plans. We watched the indicator tick, SB, pause. Then S4. A hollow cling from above, a chill on the back of my wrists like a freezer case opened, a faint, soft slosh. I realized I could smell something like the hospital's slush machines when they crank out shaved ice for cardiac rooms. Salt, cold, plastic. I paged security again. Please pull the dock camera, I said. Freight 4 is moving to, I took a breath, to S4. Where does that land? The overnight supervisor made a noise that sounded like he'd stood up too fast. What? In the controller, what floors exist for Freight 4? I'm calling Plan Ops, he said, and then hung up, which is the nice thing about old men who pick their battles. They don't waste time with protocols when the floor just moved under them. We walked to the end of the service corridor where the ceiling tiles are stained a truce between dust and water. Above the elevator shaft, the ceiling tile grid has a square that's always damp on humid nights. Tonight it was rimmed with little white spangles that I thought were plaster until I reached up and scraped a fingertip across them. Salt. Dried in crystals the way 4 pole drips dry on a floor if nobody catches them. In the center of the tile, a wetness that had a visible meniscus like someone had poured a bowl of ice over it and left the bowl behind. A footprint of water, then, bruising the ceiling. Doctor, Ben said quietly, unsarcastic for the first time all night. What is this? I don't know, I said, but I'm going to find out. You learn which keys matter when you work nights. Security's keys matter. Plan Ops keys matter more. The hospitalist's keys open rooms nobody wants to be in, resident call rooms, the EKG room where the techs eat in violation of 3 posted signs, the med consultant office with a paying everything smells like K-by-Wipes couch. Freight keys sit in Plan Ops in a drawer labeled with a brand name that hasn't existed since before the last flood. Plan Ops is a cave with clipboards. The night engineer, a man named Arsenault who survives on coffee and grudges, squinted at me like he was assessing whether I was worth his time. Freight 4 goes to the dock, he said. SB, B1. Sometimes 2. What is S4? There is no S4, he said automatically, the way a person says, we don't have mice. The indicator shows S4 when they take patients into it at 3 in the morning. Arsenault sneered at the wrong part of my sentence. They. Transport, I said. 2 people with blurred names and clean shoes. They took my patient. The acceptance is to a campus that closed. He lifted his coffee to the left side of his mouth, like the right side no longer spoke to him. Come here, he said, which is how men like him say, you're about to see a thing no one will believe. He unlocked a metal cabinet that looked like it had apologized for something in 1987 and never been forgiven. Inside were elevator schematics laminated by a man who knew spit could not be trusted. He spread one on the desk. Freight 4, he said, tracing a finger down a little column of squares. SB, B, 1, 2, 3. Fire service. Independent service. Inspection mode. What's that? I said, because there was a hairline pencil note in the margin by the column that read S4. He didn't look up. That's a thing that doesn't exist, he said. It's not on our plans. Who wrote it? Probably me, he said. Years ago. Someone called it out over the radio. Maybe on a load test. The indicator displayed S4. We checked the controller logs. Nothing in the job table for S4. It shouldn't be able to stop anywhere there isn't a landing. So what did you do? What we do when buildings lie, he said. We put in a ticket. We got told to leave it alone. By who? You know who, he said. The same people who tell you where to place patients when bed control thinks the ICU is a suggestion. Administration. The building, he said, with a grin he hadn't earned. I didn't ask permission to take the freight key. I told him I would bring it back, and he said, you won't, and then tossed it to me. Arsenault is the kind of man who wants witnesses. The freight key fits a switch on the car panel that makes the elevator yours. It turns off the phone. It makes the doors open only when you say they can. It switches the auditory chime to a different tone that means if you die in there you meant to. I badged the keypad. The doors slid open with a breath that felt colder than the hall. The car held the smell of wet metal and those slush machines we only use for hearts when we hate the Iceman's last delivery. There were 2 small water rings on the floor, puddles that had finished being puddles. I stepped in. Ben stepped in. The doors did not close yet because I hadn't asked them to. I turned the key. S4, I said out loud, because if I let my brain do it, it would laugh at me. The indicator went blank, then displayed S4. The motor above us engaged with a sigh. We moved. SB slid by. A hallway that should exist slid by. Then a sensation I have felt only on roller coasters, a brief, gentle float, as if we had passed the bottommost landing and were now going through a space that kept going. The doors opened onto a corridor no plan had the nerve to own. The air tasted like cold and salt and Virox wipes. The floor was concrete that had never learned the trick of being warm. The lights were the old kind that hum like they're thinking up a verdict. To the left, a sign with a font we retired years ago, interfacility transfer intake with a little arrow that made me want to outlaw arrows. To the right, a closed door with a window whose glass had wire in it and a sign that had had tape on it for a long time, Case Management Annex. Holy, Ben said, and he is not a man who swears. We pushed the car's gurney aside and stepped out like people entering a church after dark. The elevator doors waited with a patience that did not comfort me. The first room on the left was a bay with 3 curtained spaces like pre-op rooms, each containing a gurney with a short leather strap across it, each attached to a wall oxygen port that had been capped but was plumbed. On the counter, a stack of consents, copies of a template with every blank unfilled. On the wall, A whiteboard with erasable names that hadn't been perfectly erased. Aloysius West, County East, Hope Annex. Underneath, in dry marker, in a hand that wrote block letters too neatly to be a doctor's, accepted PR family wishes. In the corner, a slush machine, one of the big stainless ones we use for cardiac cases. It was off, but the bin had a crust of white around it like a tide line. Above the bin, the ceiling tiles were spotted with little salt stars. Beside the slush machine was a plastic tub labeled saline in Sharpie, the inside caked with crystals. Melt patterns mapped from there to the elevator doors and back. I walked to the case management annex door. It was unlocked. Inside, 3 desks. On one, an ancient printer humming with a little injured animal persistence. A stack of paper in the out tray. Transfer acceptance confirmation, forms with a place for a representative's signature and a line for received by bed management system. On the top of the stack, a form with my name under coordinating physician. The signature line had been stamped with my name, not written. The witness line said A. Morel, RN enlisted nurse. The second desk held a phone with a post-it stuck to the handset. Don't answer. A calendar on the wall was stuck at a year I liked because I didn't yet know the names of my residents. A computer sat humming with our login screen, but the domain name was wrong by 1 letter, like someone had built a fake hospital next door. There were gurney tracks on the floor, scuffs, arcs, little squeak marks where the wheels had turned. They led past a double door with push bars to an area marked loading service only with a stenciled symbol of a truck I've only seen in OSHA manuals. Through that window, darkness that looked like space. Doctor, then whispered, "Where do they go?" "I don't know," I said again, and I hated the repetition in my voice. The printer chattered. A sheet fed. I stepped to the tray and picked it up before it could cool. Interfacility transfer confirmation receiving ST. Aloysius Annex West. Accepted per family wishes. Transferor. Our hospital's legal name. Provider. Dr. Anand. Underneath, the line that lives in ADT logs forever. ADTA 08 update 307. The door behind us, the one with the wire glass, breathed. Not opened. Breathed, as if the corridor had lungs. I put the paper down and walked back toward the car because I had the sense that if I didn't look like I meant to leave, the elevator doors would have opinions about keeping me. Ben reached for my sleeve and missed. "There's a camera," he said softly and pointed up. In the corner of the intake bay, a dome camera with a red LED glowing politely. It pointed not at the double doors or the slush machine or the case management annex. It pointed directly at the elevator threshold. It pointed at the line where people either left or did not, and your hands tell the truth there even when your mouth doesn't. We stepped back into the car. I turned the key. The indicator thought for a second and then chose to be generous and display 3. The doors closed with a noise like a throat clearing, and we rose past the place my hospital admits owning. On the way back to 7W, the car stopped at B without being asked. The doors opened to a hallway I didn't know, too clean for plan ops, too glossy for the dock. A single cart sat against the wall, gurney height, with a cover over it. A corner of a blanket peeked from underneath, blue hospital weave. The corner was wet and glistening, as if it had just been flung back from a cold surface. The air smelled like saline and a refrigerator you left open. I hit the door close button too hard, and the car obeyed with a speed I didn't like. Back on 7W, the bed that had held Mr. Turalba was already assigned to a new name. The nursing care technician had stripped and remade it with the efficiency of someone who knows her job timeline better than the hospital's. The transfer packet lay in the trash can under the nurse's station shredded into convincing rectangles. The charge board had the name of some new arrival from ED pinned in a slot. The EHR had set Turalba's chart to read only. Under event log, Aid T08 transfer out to St. Aloysius Annex West, and 6 minutes later, Aid T03, discharge completed. Under orders, a line with no author, interfacility transfer, accepted per family wishes. The day resident came on at 6, with a coffee I envied and a hair tie she would regret. I told her to call case management, to call the OPO, because some part of my brain had started to narrate for monsters, to call security and tell them we had been to a place we weren't supposed to stand. I walked to plant ops and handed Arsenault his freight key like a person returns a relic. He didn't look surprised. He did look like a man who'd held the elevator doors open for a long time and given up asking where they went. Weishaupt then asked me at the end of that night, as if I had cornered the only mystery worth solving. "It's what we make organs comfortable in," I said, before I could stop my mouth from saying the quiet thing. "Ice, slush, and saline. Hearts like the cold. Lungs dislike it and pretend to like it. Kidneys are at peace anywhere they're not asked to do anything." "Stop," he said, and we both laughed too hard. I tried to write a note that made sense. I tried to write it in the EHR first, because it's how we make things real. The moment I wrote S4, the system underlined it in messy red as if it were a spelling error. The moment I wrote freight, my sentence changed itself to patient transferred per family wishes. I printed my note, put it in an envelope with my neatest block letters, took it to compliance, and slid it under a door because that made me feel like an adult. When I checked my own mailbox later, there was a memo that said, "Thank you for your concern. Plant operations confirms all elevators are functioning as designed." The next night, there were 2 interfacility transfers, both uninsured, both stabilized, both accepted by a place that doesn't exist. Both slid into a space the building will not admit is part of it. Security pulled doc video for me. It showed gurneys rolling into Freight 4, doors closing, nothing coming out. It showed my face watch the camera like the camera could watch me back. It showed a foamy ribbon of meltwater running along the threshold that vanished before anyone would daylight it. I told myself to stop. I told myself I was a doctor and not an elevator tech and not a ghost hunter and not a person who keeps salt in a pocket to test the taste of ceiling drips. Then I had a patient whose daughter sat at the bedside with her elbows like points and her eyes like future. "We can't pay," she told me without shame. "We'll pay what we can." Her mom's pneumonia had chosen a vulnerable host with chemistries I could fix. At midnight, her mom coughed and slept, sats at 95% on 2 liters, heart rate polite. "I'll check on you again at 3, I promised in my voice that tries to be normal. At 3, the bed was empty. The chart had moved to read-only. The transfer had been accepted per family wishes, which I knew were right there in a chair with elbows like questions. The daughter had gone home to shower. I tried to call a number that would have warned her. The phone rang to silence. I don't have a conclusion I can live with. I have a freight elevator that goes to a floor the building won't print. I have dried saline crystals on a ceiling tile above the shaft and slush machine tied lines on a floor I can't put on a bed control map. I have a stack of transfer confirmations in my locker like a serial killer would keep hair, because I need the paper to stay the same in a world where the EHR edits me. I have a freight key I didn't return once. I made a copy, the way criminals and residents do, because I need to know I can go back even if I shouldn't. Last night, Plant Ops paged me, which is new. "Doctor," Arsenault said in his voice like gravel that refuses to evolve, "your name is on a work order." "My name is on a lot of things," I said, too angry to be generous. "This says interfacility transfer S4, accepted per family wishes," he said. "The location is Freight Elevator 4, car top." "Car top." "Above the car," he said, as if that made the sentence less insane. "There's a hatch. Don't go up there," he added, like you tell a child not to see what he sees. I took the key. I took Ben. We opened the car, turned the switch, rose to S4, and before the doors could open, I flipped the inspection mode, so we stopped at the level of the car top. The hatch was there, a little metal door a person with a wrench could love. I looked at it and tasted salt. When I put my hand on the hatch, it was cold enough to stick to. Ben touched my arm. "We're physicians," he said steadily, which is the opposite of what he meant, which was we are not what this wants. I didn't open the hatch. I am not a hero. I am not a protagonist for a story you'd believe in a courtroom. I am a doctor who writes, "So she'll admit," when I'm ashamed of how we use words. I am a night person who counts seconds by monitor beeps. I turn the key back to where the elevator thinks it serves. The doors opened. The corridor beyond smelled like bleach and rules. The salt had made little stars on the tile again. This morning I got an email I have not opened because I already know the first line. Subject: ADT optimization, interfacility transfers. Body: please ensure acceptance packets are completed. Line: accepted per family wishes. Attachment: a PDF with a workflow diagram that has a box for everything except S4. If you ask me what I learned on nights, I will say I learned to listen to the elevators. I learned that freight 4 coughs when it's lying. I learned that the building has a conscience that belongs to someone who doesn't work here anymore. I learned that if you write on paper and keep it close, the paper will tell you when you're being rewritten. I learned that uninsured patients stabilize better at midnight than they do at 5 a.m. because at 5 a.m. paperwork wakes up and claims them. There is a line in the EMTLA policy I could recite to you in my sleep. A hospital must stabilize the patient and arrange an appropriate transfer if it has not the capacity to provide further care. The hospital writes capacity with a straight face. I know the capacity of my ICU. I know the capacity of my heart. I do not know the capacity of a freight elevator that goes to a place we don't draw on plans. Tonight, I will check on the daughter with elbows who came back and looked at the empty bed and refused to do me the favor of screaming. I will text my day team a sign out that says I filed a report because that is how we keep our jobs. I will keep the key in my pocket like a sin, and when the salt falls from the ceiling like a little snow, I will pretend for 10 minutes that my hospital's ghosts only ever meant to be kind.